The U-Haul's engine coughed to a stop, its rumbling protest echoing through the quiet suburban street. David Thompson leaned out the driver's side window, his calloused fingers gripping the sun-warmed metal as he took in their new home for the very first time. Not through pixelated listing photos or a realtor's rose-tinted descriptions, but in living, breathing reality. 127 Maplewood Lane stood proudly before them, its white clapboard siding glowing amber in the late afternoon sun. The wraparound porch begged for future summer evenings spent sipping lemonade, while the bay windows winked at them like knowing eyes. That towering oak tree with its gnarled branches, perfect for the treehouse Lily had been begging for since her 5th birthday. "Home sweet home," David murmured, the words tasting foreign yet thrilling on his tongue. After 12 years in a cramped city apartment where their backyard had been a fire escape herb garden, this 2-story colonial with its actual picket fence felt like winning the lottery. The passenger door burst open before he could kill the engine. "We're here, we're here, we're here!" Lily's high-pitched squeal shattered the quiet street as she tumbled out of the car, her pink sneakers hitting the cracked driveway with enough force to send a pebble skittering. At 6 years old, she moved with the unrestrained energy of a wind-up toy set loose, her pigtails bouncing as she spun in dizzy circles across the overgrown lawn. "Look at all this grass! Daddy, can we get a puppy? And a trampoline? And a—" "Whoa there, firecracker!" David scooped her up mid-sentence, her slight weight familiar in his arms. She smelled like the strawberry shampoo Sarah insisted on buying, and the grape lollipop she'd somehow procured during their last gas station stop. "Let's get the boxes inside before you start planning the Olympic Village, yeah?" Sarah emerged from the car with the careful movements of someone whose back had declared mutiny somewhere around hour 7 of their road trip. Her auburn hair had escaped its messy bun hours ago, now framing a face that balanced exhaustion with radiant joy. "It's perfect," she breathed, her hazel eyes drinking in every detail. The way the sunlight filtered through the oak leaves, the cheerful red front door, the hydrangea bushes just beginning to bud along the walkway. She reached blindly for David's hand and squeezed. "We actually did it." The moment hung suspended between them, this tangible proof of all their sacrifices, the overtime shifts, the skipped vacations, the years of saving every spare penny. David pressed a kiss to her temple, inhaling the familiar vanilla scent of her shampoo mixed with the new green smell of this fresh start. Lily wriggled free and immediately began helping by dragging the lightest box marked with her sprawling purple marker. "Lily's room. Do not crush." The 3 exclamation points had nearly torn through the cardboard. That's when the peaceful scene shattered. A deep guttural bark exploded from the neighboring yard. Not the friendly hello of a curious dog, but the sharp staccato warning of a guard on high alert. Lily froze. The box slipped from her fingers with a thud. At the property line stood a massive golden retriever, his luxurious coat gleaming like spilled honey in the sunlight. But there was nothing sweet about his posture. Muscles coiled, hackles raised, teeth bared in a snarl that revealed gleaming pink gums. His amber eyes locked onto them with laser focus, his entire body vibrating with tension. Nice doggy?" Lily whispered, instinctively shrinking behind David's legs. The reaction was instantaneous. The retriever, Max, as they'd soon learn, launched himself at the fence with enough force to make the wooden slats shudder. His barks turned frenzied, punctuated by guttural growls that raised the hair on David's arms. Drool flew from his jowls as he scrambled against the barrier, claws scraping wood like he intended to dig straight through to them. Sarah's sharp inhale cut through the noise. "Jesus Christ!" From the neighboring porch, an elderly man came rushing down the steps with surprising agility for someone who looked to be pushing 80. "Max, down! Heel!" His voice cracked with strain as he grabbed the dog's collar, but Max might as well have been made of stone for all the good it did. Up close, Their neighbor was the picture of grandfatherly charm. Thick silver hair, a cable-knit sweater despite the warm spring day, laugh lines that suggested a lifetime of smiles, none of which explained why his hands shook as he struggled to control the 70-pound dog currently losing its mind at the new arrivals. He's never, the man stammered, his face flushing with exertion and something else. Fear? Confusion? 8 years as a therapy dog at St. Jude's. Never so much as growled at a soul. David forced a laugh that sounded hollow even to his own ears. Guess we don't pass the sniff test yet, huh? He kept his body angled between Max and Lily, whose small fingers had twisted into the fabric of his jeans. Sarah's analytical gaze, the one she used when troubleshooting her nursing patients, swept over the scene. Max wasn't just barking randomly. His focus kept snapping back to Lily with unsettling intensity. Those intelligent eyes held no malice, but something far more unnerving. Urgent, desperate purpose. Maybe he senses the stress of the move, she offered, more to soothe Lily than from any real belief in the theory. Their neighbor, Arthur Dawson, they'd learn, shook his head so hard his glasses slipped down his nose. This isn't stress, I don't know what this is. He finally managed to drag Max backward, the dog resisting every step, his gaze locked on the Thompsons until the front door closed behind them. The silence that followed rang louder than the barks had. Lily, usually fearless around animals, stayed uncharacteristically quiet as they resumed unloading. Every few minutes her wide eyes would dart toward the Dawson house, where the curtains in an upstairs window twitched occasionally. Max keeping watch. That night, as Sarah tucked Lily into a nest of sleeping bags, their furniture wouldn't arrive until tomorrow, her daughter's question came in a whisper. Mommy? Why was Max so mad at us? Sarah smoothed back Lily's bangs, choosing her words with care. Sometimes animals get nervous about changes, sweet pea. New smells, new sounds. She pressed a kiss to Lily's forehead. He'll learn we're friends. But long after Lily's breathing evened out, Sarah stood at the kitchen window staring at the moonlit fence line. A shadow moved there, golden and sleek, pacing relentlessly along the property border. Back and forth, like a sentry standing guard against some unseen threat. And when she finally crawled into the air mattress beside David, the house's unfamiliar creaks and sighs kept her awake almost as much as the memory of those canine teeth bared not in aggression, but in what she could have sworn was warning. The third morning dawned with the same relentless barking. David Thompson stood at the kitchen window, his morning coffee turning cold in his hands, as he watched the golden retriever pace the fence line like a caged tiger. Max's sleek coat caught the early sunlight as he moved in tight, agitated circles, his nose constantly twitching toward the Thompsons' house. Every few minutes, the dog would stop dead, ears pricking forward before erupting into another volley of sharp barks that shattered the peaceful suburban morning. A small hand tugged at David's shirt. Daddy, is Max still angry? Lily's sleepy voice held the fragile hope of a child who couldn't understand why an animal wouldn't love her. David set down his mug with a clink. Let me go talk to Mr. Dawson, okay? Maybe we can figure this out. The walk next door felt longer than the 30 feet it actually was. Each step brought another round of Max's frenzied barking, the sound ricocheting off the quiet houses lining Maplewood Lane. David could feel the weight of curious eyes behind neighboring curtains, the new family already making a scene. The Dawson house stood as a mirror image to theirs, but where the Thompsons' home gleamed with fresh paint and new welcome mats, this one bore the comfortable wear of decades. The porch steps creaked a familiar greeting under David's weight, and the doorbell chimed with the tinny melody of Camptown Races. The barking inside reached fever pitch. When the door swung open, Arthur Dawson looked like he hadn't slept in days. Deep purple shadows hung beneath his bloodshot eyes, and his usual neat cardigan was misbuttoned. Behind him, Max strained against a makeshift leash tied to the stair banister, his powerful body quivering with tension. "Mr. Thompson," Arthur rasped, running a shaky hand through his disheveled silver hair. I don't know what to tell you." His voice cracked with genuine distress. The interior smelled of lemon polish and something deeper, earthier, the scent of a home that had absorbed decades of memories into its walls. Family photos lined the hallway, many featuring a younger Max wearing various therapy dog vests, surrounded by smiling children in hospital gowns. David's anger faltered. "Sir, we just want to understand. Please, call me Arthur." The old man's shoulders slumped as he gestured David inside. Max immediately lunged to the end of his tether, his barks now punctuated by high-pitched whines that seemed almost desperate. The living room was a time capsule of comfortable clutter. Crocheted Afghans draped over well-worn armchairs, a grandfather clock ticking solemnly in the corner, and shelves crowded with ceramic dog show trophies. Arthur sank into a floral print chair that had clearly been his favorite for years. "I've had Max since he was 8 weeks old," Arthur began, his gnarled fingers worrying at the armrest fabric. "Trained him myself through the Canine Companions program. He's worked in pediatric oncology wards, retirement homes." His voice trailed off as Max let out a particularly piercing whine. "Never once has he reacted like this to anyone." David studied the dog. Up close, Max's behavior was even more perplexing. The retriever wasn't displaying classic aggression. No flattened ears, no whites of the eyes showing. Instead, his entire body was oriented toward the Thompsons' house, his nose working the air frantically as if trying to catch a scent. "Is he smelling something?" David ventured. Arthur's bushy eyebrows drew together. "His nose is certainly working overtime, but what could possibly—" A sudden crash from the kitchen made them both jump. Max's barking reached a new crescendo as he pulled against his leash, hard enough to make the banister shudder. "Damn raccoons," Arthur muttered, heaving himself up with a grunt. "Been getting into my garbage all week." David followed him into a sunny yellow kitchen where a trash can lid rolled lazily on the linoleum. The window above the sink was open just enough for a clever paw to have slipped in. As Arthur bent to clean up the mess, something on the counter caught David's eye. A framed newspaper article with a photo of a much younger Arthur and Max receiving an award from the mayor. The headline read, "Local therapy dog sniffs out girl's undiagnosed diabetes." David's pulse quickened. "Arthur, what's this about?" The old man paused, potato peelings dripping from his hands. "Ah, that was 5 years back. Max kept nudging this little girl's hand during a hospital visit. Turned out he was detecting her blood sugar crash before her monitors did." His watery blue eyes flicked to his trembling dog. "Goldens have an incredible sense of smell. Cancer, seizures, even migraines." A chill crept up David's spine. Max wasn't barking at them. He was trying to tell them something. The realization must have shown on his face because Arthur suddenly went very still. "You don't think—" Outside, Lily's laughter floated through the open window as she played in their backyard. The moment the sound reached Max's ears, the dog erupted into a frenzy unlike anything before. Not barks now, but urgent staccato yips interspersed with high-pitched howls that raised the hair on David's arms. Arthur's teacup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. Neither man noticed. "David," Arthur whispered, his face gone ashen. "I think you need to take your daughter to the hospital." The digital clock on Lily's nightstand glowed 9:47 p.m. in angry red numerals when the barking began again. Sarah Thompson paused mid-tuck, the dinosaur print comforter frozen in her hands. This wasn't the usual intermittent alerts they'd grown accustomed to over the past week. This was a continuous, escalating assault of sound that vibrated through the walls. "Mommy?" Lily's small fingers curled around Sarah's wrist, her nails leaving crescent moons in the skin. Why won't Max stop? The question hung between them as another sound joined the barking. A high-pitched, nails-on chalkboard screeching that set Sarah's teeth on edge. That's new. Sarah forced calm into her voice as she crossed to the window. The ancient wooden frame groaned in protest as she wrestled it open, releasing a rush of cool night air that smelled of freshly cut grass and something else. Something metallic. The backyard was bathed in the eerie blue glow of a motion-activated security light. And there, at the fence line, Max moved like a creature possessed. Gone was the proud therapy dog posture Sarah had seen in Arthur's photos. The golden retriever moved in frantic, stuttering circles, his paws kicking up divots of earth as he alternated between clawing at the wooden fence and throwing his full weight against it. His barks had taken on a guttural, almost sobbing quality, each one ending in a strangled whine that sounded disturbingly human. But what stopped Sarah's breath was his gaze. Through the slats of the fence, Max's amber eyes locked onto Lily's second-story window with terrifying precision. The security light reflected off his corneas, creating an unsettling twin moon effect that tracked her movements, as Sarah instinctively stepped between the window and her daughter. Okay, that's enough. Sarah yanked the curtain shut with more force than necessary, the rings clattering along the rod. Time for sleep, Bug. Lily burrowed under the covers until only her wide eyes peeked out. Is Max sick? Sarah smoothed back her daughter's bangs, noting with clinical detachment that Lily's forehead felt warmer than it should. Probably just excitement from their first week in the new house. I'm sure Arthur's taking good care of him, she lied. The barking reached a fever pitch as Sarah descended the stairs, each step syncing with her hammering pulse. By the time she reached the kitchen, the sound had morphed into something between a howl and a scream. The kind of noise she'd only heard once before, during her nursing rotation in the pediatric ICU when Sarah froze with her hand on the landline phone. The memory surfaced unbidden. A 7-year-old leukemia patient coding during her night shift. The child's service dog had made that exact sound moments before the monitors flatlined. Her fingers dialed Arthur's number automatically. The phone rang, and rang. Through the kitchen window, Sarah watched Max abruptly stop barking. The retriever stood motionless for 3 heartbeats, his nose pointed skyward as if scenting the wind. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned his head and looked directly at her through the glass. Sarah's breath fogged the window as she leaned closer. There was intelligence in that gaze, an almost human understanding that raised goosebumps along her arms. Max held eye contact for 5 endless seconds before suddenly bolting toward the far corner of the yard, where the fence sagged with age. The crash of splintering wood echoed through the night as Max forced his way through. Sarah was out the back door before she'd made the conscious decision to move, her bare feet slapping against the dew-slick grass. Max, no, stop! The retriever moved like a golden streak across the lawn, heading straight for Lily's window. Sarah's pulse roared in her ears as Max began leaping against the side of the house, his powerful hind legs propelling him 4 feet off the ground each time. His claws scraped against the siding, leaving pale scars in the dark wood. Lily! Sarah's scream tore at her throat as she sprinted for the front door. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her socked feet nearly slipping on the polished hardwood. She burst into Lily's room to find her daughter sitting up in bed, rubbing sleepy eyes. Mommy? What's... The window exploded inward. Sarah barely registered the sound of shattering glass as she threw herself over Lily. A golden blur sailed through the jagged opening, landing with a thud that shook the floorboards. Max stood panting in the center of the room, his fur matted with blood from the glass cuts. The retriever's entire body quivered as he locked eyes with Sarah, then deliberately turned his gaze to Lily's nightstand. Sarah followed his line of sight. The digital clock, 9:59 p.m., glowed back at her. As the numbers flipped to 10 o'clock, Lily suddenly gasped. a wet, rattling sound Sarah had heard too many times during night shifts. Her daughter's small body arched off the bed, tiny fingers clawing at her throat as her lips turned dusky blue. Max was at the bedside before Sarah could move, his wet nose pressing insistently against Lily's neck. When Sarah finally shook off her paralysis and reached for her daughter, her fingers brushed against something beneath Lily's jaw. A lump, hard and unyielding as marble. The world narrowed to the feel of that terrible mass beneath her fingertips as Max began a new sound. A deep, resonant whine that seemed to vibrate through Sarah's bones. The retriever nudged Lily's limp hand with his nose, then looked pointedly at Sarah. In that moment, Sarah understood with crystal clarity. Max hadn't been barking at them. He'd been barking for them. The digital clock's glow painted the nursery walls an eerie crimson as Sarah stood frozen in the doorway, her bare toes curling against the cold hardwood. 3:17 a.m. The numbers burned themselves into her retinas as she inhaled sharply through her nose, the scent hitting her like a physical blow. It wasn't the usual bedtime bouquet of strawberry shampoo and fabric softener that normally clung to Lily's room. This was something darker, something wrong. A cloying sweetness that coated the back of Sarah's throat like spoiled honey. "David?" Her whisper sliced through the silence as she padded across the room. Her husband's shape remained motionless in their bed, his breathing deep and even. Sarah hesitated at Lily's door, her fingers hovering over the knob. The smell intensified as she turned the handle, the hinges letting out a soft whine that made her cringe. Moonlight streamed through the half-open curtains, illuminating Lily's sleeping form tangled in dinosaur print sheets. The child's chest rose and fell rhythmically, her lips slightly parted. Sarah leaned down to brush a sweaty curl from her daughter's forehead, then froze. The scent was strongest here, not from the overflowing trash can in the corner. She checked, lifting the lid to reveal nothing but crumpled drawings and apple cores. Not from the hamper overflowing with grass-stained clothes. She dug through it, finding only the usual childhood smells of dirt and sunshine. This odor came from Lily herself. Sarah's nursing instincts kicked in as she gently turned her daughter's head to the side, exposing the delicate curve of her neck. The skin there glowed pearlescent in the moonlight, dotted with beads of sweat that carried that same nauseating sweetness. A memory surfaced. Her third-year rotation in pediatric oncology. Little Mateo in bed 4, his IV drip clicking away as he colored pictures of superheroes. He'd had that same smell 2 days before his diagnosis. Sarah's fingers trembled as she pressed them to Lily's throat, searching for the familiar flutter of her carotid artery. The pulse beat strong, maybe too strong? Or was that her imagination? A floorboard creaked behind her. "Sarah?" David's sleep-roughened voice made her jump. "What's—" His nose wrinkled before he finished the sentence. "Jesus, what is that?" "I don't know." Her voice came out strangled. "It's coming from her." David crossed the room in 3 strides, his work-calloused hand replacing hers on Lily's forehead. "She's burning up." The thermometer beeped its verdict. 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit. Not dangerously high, but coupled with that smell. Sarah's stomach twisted as she rummaged through the medicine cabinet, the bottles clinking like wind chimes in a storm. Children's Tylenol, cool washcloth, pulse oximeter from her nursing bag. The routine should have calmed her, but that smell, it had seeped into the walls now, clinging to the stuffed animals on the shelf, the half-completed puzzle on the floor. Even the alphabet rug seemed to exhale it with every step Sarah took. Outside, Max's barking took on a new urgency. Not the sporadic alerts of before, but a continuous, desperate staccato that matched the hammering of Sarah's heart. David jerked open the window. "For God's sake!" The night air rushed in, carrying with it the crisp scent of freshly cut grass and distant rain. For one blessed moment, the sickly sweetness retreated. Then Lily whimpered in her sleep. Sarah was at her side in an instant, the oximeter clipped to her daughter's finger before she'd fully processed the movement. The numbers glowed reassuringly, 98% oxygen saturation. But when she leaned close to listen to Lily's breathing, that smell invaded her nostrils again, stronger now. It wasn't just sweet. There was something metallic underneath. Copper pennies. Wet newspaper. The scent memory hit her like a freight train. Clinical white halls, antiseptic, and beneath it all, that unmistakable iron tang. The hematology ward. Sarah's hands moved of their own accord, pushing up the sleeves of Lily's pajamas to examine the pale skin of her inner arms. The faintest constellation of pinprick bruises dotted the tender flesh, the kind she might have dismissed as playground bumps any other day. "David." Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears. "We need to—" A thunderous crash from outside cut her off. Sarah reached the window just in time to see Max hurl himself against the fence once, twice. Then the aged wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. The golden retriever hit the ground rolling, then surged toward their house with single-minded purpose. David was already moving toward the stairs. "I'll handle the damn dog." "No." Sarah's hand shot out to stop him. Her nursing scrubs were still in the laundry, but in that moment she wore them like armor. "Call an ambulance." The words dropped like stones into the stillness of the nursery. David's face went slack. "You don't think—" "Now, David." As her husband fumbled for his phone, Sarah turned back to Lily. The oximeter still showed 98%, but now she noticed the slight flare of Lily's nostrils with each breath. The faint blue tint to her lips that had nothing to do with the moonlight. Max's barking reached a fever pitch just as the first ambulance siren wailed in the distance. Sarah barely registered the sound of paws scrabbling up the porch steps, the frantic scratching at their front door. All her attention was focused on the rhythm of Lily's breathing. Too fast now, too shallow, and that terrible, beautiful smell that hung over them like a shroud. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a clinical voice recited the differential diagnosis. Diabetic ketoacidosis. No. Uremia, unlikely at this age. Then the one that made her fingers tighten around the bed rail. Certain metabolic disorders. Cancers. The doorbell rang. Sarah didn't realize she was crying until the first tear splashed onto Lily's cheek, mingling with her daughter's sweat, as the paramedics' heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. The last thing she saw before they took Lily away was Max sitting sentinel at the foot of the bed, his golden fur matted with dirt and dew. Those intelligent amber eyes watching her with something that looked suspiciously like pity. The waiting room of Pine Ridge Animal Hospital smelled of antiseptic and nervous dogs. Arthur Dawson sat stiffly on a plastic chair designed to punish human spines, his fingers working through Max's golden fur in repetitive strokes. The retriever lay panting at his feet, his normally lustrous coat dull with stress sweat, his body still vibrating with residual tension from the car ride over. "Mr. Dawson?" A technician in pastel scrubs poked her head through the swinging door. "Doctor? Chen will see you now." The exam room walls were plastered with posters about heartworm prevention and proper leash etiquette. Max immediately began sniffing the stainless steel table with unusual intensity, his wet nose leaving shiny trails on the cold surface. Dr. Chen entered with a clipboard, her dark ponytail swinging. In her mid-40s with laugh lines around her eyes, she moved with the calm efficiency of someone who'd seen everything. Until she looked at Max. "Well, hello, handsome," she cooed, extending a hand. Max ignored the gesture, instead pressing his muzzle against her lab coat pocket with unusual insistence. Arthur cleared his throat. He's never been like this before, not in 8 years. His voice cracked on the number. The vet's playful demeanor shifted as Max began nudging her stethoscope with frantic urgency. "Interesting," she murmured, allowing the dog to guide her movements. For the next 20 minutes, Arthur watched in growing confusion as Dr. Chen conducted the most unconventional examination he'd ever witnessed. She let Max sniff her tools before using them. She observed not just his physical responses, but where he focused his attention. When she lifted his lip to check his gums, Max seized the opportunity to lick her wrist, not affectionately, but with deliberate, repeated swipes. Dr. Chen froze. She brought her wrist to her nose and inhaled sharply. Then, moving with sudden purpose, she rummaged through a cabinet and produced a box of latex gloves and a sterile wipe. "Mr. Dawson," she said as she scrubbed her arm, "has Max been around anyone new recently?" Arthur's knees popped as he stood. "The Thompsons moved in next door last week, but that's not—" Describe their interactions. The question threw him. He recounted the barking, the fence clawing, the way Max had fixated on their little girl. Halfway through his explanation, Dr. Chen began typing rapidly on her computer. The printer whirred to life, spitting out several pages which the vet immediately began annotating with a red pen. Arthur caught glimpses of highlighted terms: volatile organic compounds, biomarker detection thresholds, canine olfaction sensitivity ranges. "Dr. Chen," Arthur's voice rose, "what exactly are we—" The vet turned the monitor toward him. On screen, a PubMed article displayed a graph showing canine response rates to various chemical stimuli. A red arrow pointed to one particular spike on the chart. "Max isn't being aggressive," Dr. Chen said quietly. "He's flagging a medical alert." Arthur's hearing narrowed to a tunnel. The words that followed came as if through water. Dogs detect metabolic changes at parts per trillion concentrations. Particular sensitivity to ketones and certain aromatic hydrocarbons. That sweet smell people often report before diagnosis. A Polaroid photo landed in Arthur's lap before he realized Dr. Chen had pulled it from a bulletin board. It showed a younger Max wearing his therapy vest, surrounded by beaming children in hospital gowns. One bald little girl hugged him especially tight. "That's Emily Park," Dr. Chen said softly. 3 days after this photo, Max started refusing to leave her bedside. He'd paw at her IV pole. The nurses thought he was being difficult. She pointed to a yellow sticky note stuck to the photo's edge. Arthur squinted at the handwritten date. 2 days before Emily's leukemia relapse was confirmed by tests. The room tilted. Arthur gripped the exam table as decades of memories rearranged themselves. All the times Max had lingered with certain patients. The way he'd sometimes ignore treat commands when near particular hospital beds. Not disobedience. Detection. Dr. Chen was speaking again, her voice urgent. "Has the Thompson girl shown any symptoms? Fatigue? Unexplained bruising? That fruity breath odor?" Arthur's mouth went dry. He remembered Lily's flushed cheeks yesterday, how she'd stumbled climbing their porch steps. He'd assumed summer heat. The vet was already dialing her phone. "I trained with Dr. Goldstein at Penn Vet's Working Dog Center. Their cancer detection studies show—" A sudden crash cut her off. Max had knocked over a tray of instruments and now stood with his front paws on the windowsill, staring fixedly across the parking lot. His entire body quivered like a bowstring pulled taut. Arthur followed his gaze to the hospital across the street. Maplewood General, where an ambulance was just pulling into the ER bay. Even from this distance, he recognized the small figure being lifted onto a gurney. Lily's strawberry blonde hair fanned out against the white sheets like a warning flag. Max let out a sound Arthur had never heard before. A keening, high-pitched whine that raised the hair on his arms. The retriever began scratching at the window, his claws leaving desperate streaks on the glass. Dr. Chen's phone clattered to the floor. When she spoke again, her voice had changed entirely. "Arthur," she said, gripping his shoulder, "we need to get you to that hospital right now." The tires of Arthur Dawson's ancient Buick screeched as he fishtailed into the Thompsons' driveway, gravel spraying like shrapnel against the undercarriage. Max panted in the back seat, his drool making dark constellations on the upholstery, his whole body vibrating with the aftershocks of whatever he'd sensed at the vet's office. Arthur didn't bother shutting the car door. He took the porch steps 2 at a time, his arthritic knees screaming in protest. Through the leaded glass sidelight, he could see David Thompson standing in the foyer, phone pressed to his ear, his free hand rubbing absently at the 3-day stubble darkening his jaw. The doorbell chimed its cheerful tune, some Mozart snippet that felt obscenely inappropriate given the circumstances. When no immediate answer came, Arthur began pounding on the oak door with the side of his fist, the heavy gold band he'd worn since Martha's passing, leaving crescent-shaped impressions in the wood. "Arthur?" David swung the door open, his forehead creased with confusion. Behind him, the house smelled of fresh paint and lemon cleaner, and something else, something metallic lurking beneath the surface. "What's—" "You need to check for gas leaks." Arthur's voice came out sharper than he intended, the words clipped and urgent. "Right now." A flicker of annoyance crossed David's face. "We already had the inspection before closing. Everything was—" "Not an inspection." Arthur stepped forward, forcing David to retreat into the foyer. Max squeezed past their legs, his nails clicking frantically against the hardwood as he made a beeline for the staircase. "A real check, with detectors. The kind that measure parts per million." David's eyes tracked Max's progress up the stairs, his expression shifting from confusion to dawning unease. "What aren't you telling me?" The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked 3 ponderous seconds before Arthur responded. He could still see Dr. Chen's hands sketching frantic diagrams in the air as she explained about canine olfaction ranges, about how Max's behavior matched case studies from the Penn Vet Working Dog Center. "Max is a medical alert dog," Arthur said carefully. "Trained to detect." He hesitated, the words clotting in his throat. "How did you tell a man his child might be in mortal danger?" "Certain chemical changes in the human body." David's face went slack. His phone slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering onto the entryway tile. The screen lit up with Sarah's caller ID. The hospital, Arthur realized with a fresh wave of dread. Somewhere upstairs, Max began barking in sharp staccato bursts, the same pattern he'd used during his hospital shifts when a patient's vitals were crashing. David moved first. They found Max in Lily's bedroom, his front paws up on the windowsill as he stared fixedly at the hospital across town. The retriever's entire body quivered with tension, his breath fogging the glass in quick, panicked bursts. Arthur didn't need to see the hospital to know what Max was seeing in his mind's eye. The 2 white walls, the beeping monitors, the small figure in the oversized bed. David was already dialing with shaking hands. "Gas company emergency line," he muttered as the phone rang. "They said 20 minutes. Max whirled from the window, his amber eyes locking onto David with unnatural intensity. Then, with deliberate slowness, the dog padded to Lily's bed and began sniffing along the headboard with methodical precision. His wet nose left shiny trails on the wood as he worked his way down to the mattress, then suddenly froze. A low, continuous growl vibrated through the room. Arthur knelt beside Max, his knees popping in protest. "What is it, boy?" The retriever's nose was pressed against a particular spot on the mattress, right where Lily's pillow met the headboard. Arthur leaned closer, inhaling through his nose like Dr. Chen had demonstrated. At first, just the usual bedroom smells: fabric softener, child sweat, the faint chemical tang of new mattress off-gassing. Then he caught it. The barest whisper of something sweet beneath the surface. Not the cloying artificial strawberry of Lily's shampoo, but something darker, more organic, like overripe pears left to rot in the sun. Arthur's stomach lurched. He'd smelled this exactly once before, during Martha's final weeks, when the cancer had metastasized to her liver. "David," he said softly, "call Sarah." The younger man didn't move. His gaze was fixed on the wall above Lily's bed, where a series of finger-painted masterpieces hung in haphazard arrangement. One in particular seemed to hold his attention, a chaotic swirl of red and yellow that looked more like a Rorschach test than a child's artwork. "Lily did that last week," David murmured. "She said it was how her head felt sometimes." His voice cracked. "I thought she meant imagination." Max let out a sharp yip, his entire body tensing as if struck by lightning. The retriever's head snapped toward the window just as Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. Dr. Chen's text glowed on the screen. "Preliminary blood work shows elevated WBCs and blast cells. They're doing a bone marrow biopsy now." Arthur didn't need his veterinary degree to understand what that meant. Neither did David, judging by the way all the blood drained from his face as he read over Arthur's shoulder. The doorbell rang. 2 technicians in blue coveralls stood on the porch, their equipment cases emblazoned with the gas company logo. The older one, a grizzled man with a salt and pepper mustache, held out a handheld device studded with blinking lights. "Where do you want us to start?" David opened his mouth, then closed it again. His gaze flickered between the gas detectors and Max, who was now standing rigid in the hallway, his nose pointed unerringly toward the hospital across town. Arthur saw the exact moment understanding dawned. The way David's shoulders slumped, the way his fingers curled into impotent fists at his sides. "Start with her room," David whispered. Then, louder, "Start with Lily's room." As the technicians moved past them, Arthur reached for David's arm. The younger man was trembling, his skin clammy beneath Arthur's grasp. Max whined low in his throat, the sound vibrating through the sudden silence. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The gas technician's boots left faint imprints in the plush carpet as he crossed Lily's bedroom threshold. His handheld detector extended like a divining rod. The device was an ugly yellow thing, its surface scratched from years of service, a single red LED blinking lazily in its center. "Standard procedure," the technician, whose name tag read Hank, muttered as he waved the unit in slow arcs. "We'll do a quick sweep. Check all the—" The detector's shrill alarm cut him off mid-sentence. What began as an intermittent chirp escalated into a continuous ear-piercing shriek within 3 seconds. The blinking red light became a strobe, casting hellish flashes across the dinosaur print walls. Hank's experienced hands fumbled with the controls, his thick fingers stabbing at buttons that did nothing to silence the machine's screaming. "Jesus wept," he breathed, his normally ruddy complexion going ashen. The digital readout on the detector's face spun wildly before locking onto a number that made his Adam's apple bob convulsively. David Thompson's voice came from somewhere far away. "What does that mean?" Hank didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved the detector in slow, methodical passes, first along the baseboards, then across the bed, finally holding it near the vent. Each new position made the alarm's pitch climb higher, the numbers on the display ticking upward with terrifying consistency. When he finally spoke, his voice had the clipped precision of a man reciting emergency protocols. "Carbon monoxide reading of 287 parts per million at head height. A beat. EPA says 9 parts per million over 8 hours is actionable." Somewhere behind them, Arthur Dawson made a sound like a drowning man breaking surface. Max let out a low, continuous whine that vibrated through the floorboards. Sarah Thompson, who had just appeared in the doorway still wearing her hospital visitor's badge, took 2 stumbling steps forward before her legs gave out entirely. David barely caught her before she hit the carpet, her fingers digging into his arms hard enough to leave bruises. "Lily," she gasped, her clinical nurse's mind already doing the horrifying math. "She's been sleeping in here for—" Hank was already yanking open the window with such force that the curtain's rod came crashing down. "Everyone out! Now!" His partner downstairs must have heard the alarm, because the whole house suddenly echoed with the sounds of slamming doors and shouted commands. David half carried Sarah into the hallway, where the air already tasted cleaner. Through the open bedroom door, they could see Hank and his partner working with frantic efficiency, shutting off the furnace, deploying industrial fans, barking orders into radios. Max pressed his wet nose against Sarah's limp hand, his warm tongue lapping at her fingers with urgent little flicks. Arthur stood frozen in the hallway, his wrinkled hands clutching at his cardigan like a life preserver. "It's the furnace," Hank announced as he emerged from the bedroom, sweat darkening the underarms of his coveralls. "Heat exchangers cracked straight through. Been dumping CO into this room for—" He trailed off, suddenly aware of the devastated faces surrounding him. Sarah made a wounded animal sound low in her throat. David's arms tightened around her, but his eyes were fixed on Lily's half-finished juice box on the nightstand, the tiny tooth marks visible around the rim. Hank cleared his throat. "We'll need to check everyone's carboxyhemoglobin levels." He hesitated, then added softly, "Especially the little girls." The word "especially" hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Sarah's nursing training surfaced through the shock. "Headache," she whispered. "Lily's been complaining about headaches all week." Her fingers flew to her mouth. "And the vomiting. We thought it was just a stomach bug." David made an aborted movement toward the bedroom, as if he could somehow retroactively pull his daughter from that toxic air. "But the detectors, we installed brand new." "Where?" Hank interrupted sharply. "By the basement stairs and—" David's voice died as realization struck. "Not in the bedrooms." A heavy silence settled over the group, broken only by Max's distressed panting. The retriever kept alternating between pressing against Sarah's legs and staring down the hallway toward the front door, as if willing Lily to materialize. Hank's partner emerged from the basement, his face grim. "Worst case I've seen in 12 years, he announced, holding up a shattered piece of metal that looked like it had been through a war. "This exchanger's been failing for months. Should have been caught at last inspection." Arthur made a sudden choked noise. All eyes turned to where he stood, pointing at Lily's nightstand. The digital clock's display, which normally glowed red, had gone completely dark. "Power surge from the fans?" David ventured weakly. Hank shook his head, moving to examine the outlet. His flashlight beam revealed something far more sinister. A scorch mark spiderwebbing out from behind the outlet cover, the plastic slightly melted. "Faulty wiring," he muttered. "Probably arcing for weeks." His flashlight beam traveled up the wall to where Lily's favorite pink nightlight was still plugged in. This little guy was seconds away from starting a fire. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Sarah's knees buckled again, saved only by David's iron grip. Max began barking in sharp staccato bursts, the same pattern he'd used at the hospital when monitors flatlined. Hank's radio crackled to life with dispatcher codes. Behind the static, a voice repeated two words that froze the blood in David's veins. "Code Blue." The timestamp on the radio display matched the exact moment Lily's clock had died. The ambulance bay doors exploded inward with a hydraulic hiss, flooding the sterile hallway with the coppery scent of rain-soaked pavement and diesel exhaust. Sarah Thompson's sneakers squeaked against the linoleum as she sprinted after the gurney, her fingers still tinged pink from where she'd clawed at the EMT's uniform during the frantic ride over. "Pediatric ICU now!" The attending physician's bark sent nurses scrambling like stirred hornets. Lily's small form lay terrifyingly still beneath the oxygen mask, her strawberry blonde hair fanned across the pillow like a halo of flame against the starch-white sheets. The cardiac monitor's erratic spikes painted jagged mountain ranges across its display, each peak narrower than the last. Sarah's nursing training surfaced through the haze of her own carbon monoxide headache. She could recite the textbook symptoms even as they manifested in her daughter's fragile body. The cherry-red skin tone just visible at Lily's hairline, the shallow, rapid respirations, the way her tiny fingers spasmed intermittently against the restraints. A resident pressed a clipboard into Sarah's hands. "Consent for hyperbaric treatment," she said, her pen already indicating where to sign. The words blurred as Sarah scanned the risks: barotrauma, oxygen toxicity, tympanic membrane rupture. Her signature emerged as a shaky hieroglyph at the bottom of the page. Somewhere behind them, the ER doors crashed open again. David stumbled through, supported by two orderlies, his skin the color of wet newspaper. Max bounded at his heels, his therapy dog vest conspicuously absent, his golden fur matted with rain and soot from the ruined house. "Sir, you can't." The retriever dodged the grasping orderly with a liquid twist of his body, his claws scrabbling for purchase on the slick floor, as he made a beeline for Lily's gurney. A nurse moved to intercept, but Sarah's hoarse shout stopped her mid-step. "He's part of her treatment team." The lie slipped out smoother than truth ever could. Max didn't hesitate. He pressed his damp muzzle against Lily's bare ankle, his entire body quivering with focused intensity. When the respiratory therapist adjusted the oxygen flow, Max's ears pricked forward, his nose working the air currents like a sommelier evaluating a fine wine. The hyperbaric chamber loomed at the end of the corridor, its porthole window glowing with eerie blue light. As the team transferred Lily to the steel table, Dr. Khatri, a compact woman with silver streaks framing her face like a storm cloud, blocked Sarah's path. "Your turn," she said, nodding to a second chamber being prepped. Sarah shook her head hard enough to send black spots dancing across her vision. "I'm not leaving her." David's hand closed around her elbow, his grip frighteningly weak. "Sarah, your blood work." A sudden chorus of alarms cut through the argument. Lily's monitor showed a precipitous drop in oxygen saturation, 62% and falling. Max let out a sharp, piercing whine that raised the hair on every neck in the room. Dr. Khatri moved with terrifying efficiency. "Prep for intubation." "Where's that?" The crash cart arrived with a squeal of wheels. Sarah's world narrowed to the glint of the laryngoscope blade as it disappeared into her daughter's mouth, to the way Lily's chest hitched but didn't rise, to the ventilator's ominous silence as they waited for the tube to seat. Max planted himself at the foot of the bed, his body rigid save for the subtle tremors running through his haunches. His nostrils flared rhythmically, timing with the respiratory therapist's bagging. In, out, as if he could will the oxygen into Lily's lungs through sheer canine determination. "Got it?" The anesthesiologist's triumphant shout coincided with the ventilator's first mechanical whoosh. The numbers on the monitor began their agonizing climb. 65, 72, 79. Dr. Khatri checked her watch. "We've got a 90-minute window before neuronal damage becomes irreversible." Her dark eyes flicked to the still-sealing hyperbaric chamber door. "Assuming the CO was purged from your home before transport?" David opened his mouth, but Max reacted first. A sudden sharp bark followed by an insistent nudge at Sarah's thigh. When she looked down, the retriever was holding something in his mouth. A scrap of singed fabric from Lily's favorite pajamas, the ones she'd been wearing when the CO detector screamed. The implication hit Sarah like a freight train. "She was re-exposed!" Sarah lunged for the chamber controls. "At the house, the blanket we wrapped her in." Chaos erupted. Dosages were recalculated, flow rates adjusted, monitors recalibrated. Through the porthole, Lily's small face seemed to float in the pressurized atmosphere, her features distorted by the curved glass into something eerily angelic. Max refused to leave his post even as the chamber pressurized with a series of metallic groans. He lay pressed against the base like a golden sphinx, his unblinking stare fixed on Lily's face, his tail giving a single decisive thump whenever her vitals improved. The clock on the wall became Sarah's personal tormentor. Each passing minute etched itself into her bones, the way the second hand stuttered at the top of each rotation, the way the fluorescent lights buzzed louder during the quiet moments between crises. At the 87-minute mark, Dr. Khatri let out a breath Sarah hadn't realized the entire medical team was holding. COHB down to 12%. She peeled off her gloves with a snap. Out of the woods. The sob that tore from Sarah's throat startled even her. David's arms encircled her just in time to keep them both upright, as the chamber hissed open, releasing the faintest whiff of singed hair and pressurized oxygen, the scent of survival. Lily's eyelids fluttered like trapped butterflies. When they finally opened, her first word wasn't for her parents, but for the golden blur at the foot of her bed. "Max," she croaked, her chapped lips curving into the sweetest smile Sarah had ever seen. Later, after the tests and the tears and the inevitable paperwork, Dr. Khatri would pull them aside. Her penlight played over Lily's reactive pupils as she spoke words that would haunt Sarah's dreams for years to come. Another hour in that house? We wouldn't be having this conversation. Sarah didn't need to look to know Max was there. His warm weight against her leg, his steady breathing syncopated with Lily's, his watchful amber eyes missing nothing, just as they never had. The Thompsons' front door creaked open with a sound like an old man's joints, revealing a house that smelled of industrial cleaners and fresh paint. The carbon monoxide incident had left its invisible scars. Every soft surface steam-cleaned, every air duct scoured, the furnace replaced with a gleaming new unit that hummed quietly in the basement. Lily slipped past her parents' protective grasp the moment they crossed the threshold, her pink sneakers leaving faint prints on the freshly polished hardwood. She moved with the tentative energy of a child who'd spent too long in hospital beds, her steps both eager and unsteady. Max waited at the exact center of the foyer, his golden fur catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the stained glass transom. For the first time since they'd met, his posture was relaxed, shoulders loose, tail at half-mast, ears perked forward without tension. The therapy dog vest Arthur had brought to the hospital lay discarded on the hall bench. Max had refused to wear it since Lily's recovery began. "Maxie!" Lily's voice cracked with emotion as she dropped to her knees, uncaring of the jeans Sarah had just helped her into that morning. The retriever met her halfway, his warm weight settling into her lap with the precision of a creature who'd memorized every contour of her small body. Lily buried her face in the thick fur at his neck, inhaling the familiar scent of sunshine and dog biscuits that no hospital antiseptic could erase. "You're my hero," she whispered into his ruff, the words muffled but clear. Max responded by ducking his head to lick the tender spot behind her ear, the same place he'd nuzzled when her fever spiked in the ICU. His tail swept the floor in broad, rhythmic arcs, stirring up tiny dust motes that glittered in the sunlight. Each wag carried the force of a pendulum, thumping against the baseboard with enough power to rattle the framed photos hanging above. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth as she watched the reunion. The last time Lily had tried to hug Max, he'd been stiff with tension, his focus locked onto some invisible threat. Now he melted into the embrace, his entire body vibrating with quiet joy, as Lily's fingers found his favorite scratching spot behind his left ear. David set down their overnight bags with deliberate slowness, afraid to break the spell. The bag still carried the sharp, sterile odor of the hospital, a stark contrast to the homey smells of lemon oil and fresh-baked cookies Arthur had left for their return. A floorboard creaked on the porch. Arthur stood in the doorway, his gnarled fingers clutching a casserole dish covered in foil. The old man's eyes shone suspiciously bright as he took in the scene. His once anxious dog now the picture of contentment, his tail thumping a steady rhythm against Lily's wheelchair, which they hopefully wouldn't need much longer. Arthur's voice cracked as he held out the dish. Made your favorite, mac and cheese with those breadcrumbs you like. Lily didn't let go of Max, but she turned far enough to beam at Arthur. With the crunchy bits on top? The very same. Arthur set the dish on the hall table with a clatter, then surprised everyone by sinking to his knees beside them. His joints popped audibly, but his hands were steady as they stroked Max's flank. Someone's been pacing by the window for 3 days straight, he murmured. Wouldn't even eat his steak scraps Tuesday. Max chose that moment to roll onto his back, presenting his belly to Lily with complete trust. His tongue lolled sideways as her careful fingers traced the jagged scar from his emergency surgery last year, a badge of honor that matched the still-fading bruise on Lily's inner elbow from all the blood draws. Sarah's phone chose that moment to buzz. Dr. Khatri's name flashed on the screen along with the long-awaited test results. Her thumb hovered over the notification, caught between professional curiosity and maternal terror. Lily, perceptive as always, didn't look up from where she was planting kisses on Max's nose. It's okay, Mommy. Max says I'm better now. And that's when Sarah saw it. The way Max's right paw rested protectively over Lily's wrist, his claws carefully sheathed, as he tapped out a slow rhythm against her pulse point. The exact same rhythm he'd maintained during her worst night in the ICU, when the monitors had screamed and the crash cart had been called. David's hand found Sarah's shoulder, squeezing gently as she finally opened the message. The numbers swam before her eyes. COHB levels normal. Cardiac enzymes stable. Neurological responses. Textbook perfect. At the bottom of the report, Dr. Khatri had added a single line. Tell that dog of yours the hematology department owes him a steak. The dam broke then. Sarah's knees hit the floor beside her daughter and their miracle dog, her tears soaking into Max's fur as she buried her face against his sturdy neck. David wasn't far behind, his large hands spanning both his wife's shoulders and his daughter's back, creating a human shield no invisible poison could penetrate. Arthur discreetly wiped his glasses on his cardigan before speaking. I was thinking... He cleared his throat. That fence between our properties is getting pretty old. Might be nice to put in a gate. Lily's gasp echoed through the foyer. So Max can visit anytime? Arthur's smile deepened the wrinkles around his eyes. I was thinking more like, so he can live where he's clearly needed most. The resulting group hug nearly toppled them all. Max, ever the professional, took it in stride, licking every face within reach, his tail wagging hard enough to power a small wind turbine. Outside, the new carbon monoxide detector chirped its all-clear signal. Somewhere in the kitchen, the casserole dish let out a contented bubble. And in the heart of the home they'd almost lost, a little girl whispered secrets into golden fur, while her parents held on tight. The July sun hung heavy over Maplewood Lane, turning the freshly cut grass into a carpet of emerald blades that released their sweet green scent with every footfall. Arthur Dawson wiped the sweat from his brow with a faded bandana, the hammer in his other hand glinting as he stepped back to admire his handiwork. The gate stood proudly between the two properties, not some flimsy prefab enclosure from the hardware store, but a custom-crafted masterpiece of cedar and wrought iron. Each picket had been sanded smooth to prevent splinters, the hinges oiled to silent perfection. The latch mechanism designed to open easily even for Lily's small hands. At the very top, an ornate M had been forged from the same iron as the Thompsons' porch railing, its elegant curves catching the sunlight. From her perch on the garden bench, Lily watched the final touches with barely contained excitement, her legs swinging inches above the ground. The wheelchair sat abandoned nearby, its seat cushion already collecting fallen cherry blossoms from the tree overhead. Max lay sprawled across her feet, like a living weighted blanket, his chin resting on her pink sneakers as he monitored Arthur's progress through half-lidded eyes. "Try it out, Bug," David called from where he and Sarah were setting up the picnic table. He nodded toward the gate, his smile crinkling the corners of eyes that had finally lost their haunted look. Lily didn't need to be told twice. She was off the bench in a flash, Max rising with her in that uncanny way he had of anticipating her movements. The new gate swung open without so much as a creak, its well-balanced weight gliding smoothly beneath Lily's small hands. "Oh!" The exclamation burst from her as she crossed the threshold into Arthur's yard. The first official journey through what would become known forever after as Max's door. The grass here felt different beneath her sneakers, springier somehow, and the air carried the faint cinnamon scent of Arthur's prize-winning roses. Max trotted ahead, his tail waving like a golden banner, leading her on a winding path past the vegetable garden, where he'd once dug up all the carrots, around the old oak, still bearing claw marks from his puppy years, and finally to the back porch, where a familiar red leash hung from a wrought iron hook. Lily's breath caught. The leash had been Arthur's constant companion during Max's therapy dog years, retired after his hip surgery last winter. Its braided fabric was worn smooth in spots from years of faithful service. Arthur appeared beside her, his work boots scuffing against the flagstones. "Figured it's time this found a new home," he said, lifting the leash from its hook with ceremonial care. The brass nameplate glinted as he turned it over, revealing fresh engraving beneath Max's original information. "Property of Lily Thompson, certified hero tears," pricked at Lily's eyes as she fastened the leash to Max's collar, more for tradition than necessity, since he hadn't needed physical restraint in years. The clasp clicked shut with finality, sealing an unspoken promise. Back in the Thompsons' yard, Sarah set down a pitcher of lemonade just as her phone buzzed. The screen showed a photo from Dr. Kotri, Lily's latest blood work results superimposed over a snapshot of Max in his therapy vest. The numbers all fell within normal ranges, the toxic specter of carbon monoxide now just a fading nightmare. A burst of laughter drew her attention to the fence line where Lily was leading Arthur and Max through the gate in a makeshift parade, the old man pretending to play a trumpet while Max carried a stick like a royal scepter. David caught Sarah's eye from across the yard, his own phone held up to show the matching test results notification he'd just received. The moment hung suspended between them, fragile as a soap bubble. The fear they'd almost lost everything, the joy of having it returned, the quiet understanding that some bonds transcend species. Sarah lifted her camera just as Max broke formation to lick Lily's cheek, his tail wagging hard enough to knock Arthur's hat askew. That night, as fireflies began their evening dance above the lawn, the two families gathered around a picnic table that straddled both properties. The meal was a hodgepodge of Arthur's famous mac and cheese, Sarah's slightly charred burgers, and Lily's proudly assembled salad of whatever vegetables she could pick without cooking. Max held court beneath the table, accepting tribute from every plate with regal dignity. When the last fork had been set down and the final story shared, Arthur's tale of how Max once alerted an entire nursing home to a kitchen fire, Lily yawned enormously, her small body listing sideways into Sarah's lap. Max immediately rested his chin on her knee, his liquid brown eyes reflecting the string lights overhead. "Time for bed, firecracker," David murmured, scooping her up with practiced ease. Lily's protest was half-hearted at best, her fingers still tangled in Max's fur. "But who'll tuck him in?" Arthur chuckled, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears. "Think we all know where that dog's sleeping tonight." And sure enough, as Sarah carried Lily up to her now carbon monoxide detector-adorned bedroom, Max padded silently behind, his nails clicking a familiar rhythm on the hardwood stairs. He waited patiently while Lily brushed her teeth, extra long to make up for hospital time, changed into her new dinosaur pajamas with easy access sleeves for blood draws, and said her prayers, which now included thanks for the best dog in the whole world. Only when she was safely tucked in did Max perform his newest ritual. 3 careful circles by the foot of the bed before settling into his now permanent spot, his body forming a living barrier between Lily and the window where danger had once crept in unseen. Sarah paused in the doorway, watching as her daughter's small hand found its way to Max's back, her fingers automatically seeking the spot between his shoulder blades where his heartbeat was strongest. The rise and fall of their breathing synchronized within minutes, 2 creatures bound by something deeper than leash or law. Downstairs, the front door clicked shut as Arthur let himself out, but not before running his hand along the top of the new gate with quiet satisfaction. The M gleamed in the moonlight, a silent sentinel standing watch over this new chapter. Somewhere in the neighborhood, another dog barked. Max's ear twitched, but he didn't lift his head. He was exactly where he belonged. And every night, before bed, Lily would whisper, "Good night, Max. Thank you for keeping us safe."